Welcome to Commander's Tech, Weapons and Warfare in Context. The late 19th century was a time of rapid technological change that completely transformed military small arms. In a period of less than 50 years, they went from smoothbore muskets to small caliber, high velocity, smokeless powder rifles of the type that would serve through both world wars and all the way into the Cold War. The 1870s and the 1880s was the time of the most significant and rapid technological change as they transitioned from muzzleloaders used in the Civil War through breech-loading rifles, breech-loading single-shot rifles, to repeating rifles in a span of less than 20 years. Let's take a look at the top 5 military black powder cartridge rifles of the late 19th century. Number 5 on our list is the Remington Rolling Block. The original design was patented in 1863. Production began in 1866, initially as a rimfire conversion on the Springfield-type muskets used in the U.S. Civil War. The Remington Rolling Block went through several different variations and modifications over the course of its production life, but what remained true through all the different versions was a simple and robust breech block action operated by a thumb tab. It's a simple rolling breech block. Rolls open, rolls closed. When opened, an extractor and ejector will eject the currently spent casing, allowing you to load the next one and then close it up. This was an excellent design early on, but it did have one fatal flaw, which is that this design was not suitable at all for conversion to any kind of a repeating or magazine rifle. But in the 1870s, this was one of the first dedicated breech loaders, and it saw significant military adoption all over the world. It was adopted in the United States by the New York National Guard, as well as by the U.S. Navy on at least a limited basis. In addition, these were adopted all over Scandinavia and produced locally in Scandinavia, in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. In addition to that, they were also very popular in Central and South America and with Spain, the Spanish rolling block and Argentine rolling blocks. But one of the first major military adopters was Egypt, at a time when Egypt was a satrap of the Ottoman Empire, but was increasingly coming under British influence. You want to see a few of these in the movies? In the movie Cartoon, with Charlton Heston, the Egyptian forces are armed with a lot of these rolling blocks. While the Remington Rolling Block is still somewhat popular with target shooters and cowboy action shooters and hunters today, the last military rolling blocks were actually produced and used in the early 20th century. There's the model 1907, which was in 7mm Mauser, which was smokeless centerfire cartridge. That one was actually produced by Remington to be marketed and sold mostly to Central and South American countries for equipping in conscripts at a time when the general consensus and the general attitude was that draftees and conscripts couldn't be trusted with multi-shot or repeating rifles. So single-shot rifles were still preferred for uneducated conscripts. The other late model, although it may not have seen much use, Remington did produce a model in 8mm Lebel for use by the French during the First World War. Although rumor has it that those went straight to the stockpiles, went straight to surplus, and never actually saw use. The Remington Rolling Block. Number 4, the Martini Henry. The Martini action was created by Friedrich von Martini and is known for its strength, its simplicity, and its ease of use. The Martini Henry rifle was adopted by the British Army in 1871, mating the Martini action with the Henry rifling pattern in a heavy centerfire black powder cartridge 5.77-450 Martini Henry. The Martini Henry operates on a single shot falling block lever action system like this. It is a simple, robust, easy to use action, but strictly single shot, and there's really no way to update this into a repeating or magazine fed rifle. The Martini Henry served as the standard rifle of British and Commonwealth forces in the 1870s and 1880s, particularly notable for its use during the Anglo-Zulu War in 1879 and its service at the battles of Isandlwana and Rorke's Drift. It also saw significant use during the Sudanese campaigns and in various conflicts in India, Afghanistan, and other parts of the world. The Martini Henry was phased out of service in the late 1880s in favor of the Lee Metford, but during the Second Anglo-Boer War at the turn of the 20th century, it was largely pressed back into service due to shortages in Lee Metfords and Lee Enfields, in which case the Martini Henrys were rebarreled in 303 and redesignated Martini Enfields or Martini Metfords, depending on which rifling pattern they used. Martini Henrys, Martini Enfields, and Martini Metfords remained in service particularly with colonial forces even into World War I, where colonial forces often were still being issued with Lee Metfords colonial forces were often still being issued Martini Metfords or Martini Enfields, and in fact, T.E. Lawrence's Arab Legion was principally equipped with Martinis. So again, the Martini Henry's key flaw, much like with the Remington Rolling Block, is as a dedicated single-shot rifle, there was really no way to update this into a repeating rifle. Number 3 is the Gras rifle. The Gras was developed by Colonel Gras, who was the chief armorer at the French arsenal at Châtellerault. The Gras wasn't so much a new design, as much as it was a centerfire conversion of the earlier 1866 Chassepot rifle, which was a needle-fire rifle similar to the Prussian Drace needle gun. The Gras is, of course, a centerfire rifle using a metallic case in 11x59 Gras. The Gras was adopted in 1874, and as it was largely a conversion of the 86 Lebel, actually it's not strictly a conversion, many Gras rifles were purpose-made as the Gras rifle, although many of the 1866 Chassepot rifles were re-arsenaled into Gras rifles. You'll notice a distinction in the markings, whether it shows that it's an 1866/74 or an 1874. 6674 is the Chassepot converted to Gras, 74 is a Gras that was made as a Gras. The Gras is a dedicated single-shot rifle, but it is a bolt action, so the design theoretically could have been updated to make it a repeating rifle. The Gras itself was not updated in that way, but most subsequent French bolt-action battle rifles of the 19th and early 20th centuries are based on this design. The Gras itself seems to be the direct basis for the later Kropatschek rifle, which is a tubular magazine rifle based on the Gras action but with a Winchester-type tubular magazine. The Kropatschek, in turn, is the obvious basis for the 86 Lebel, which of course was the first smokeless powder centerfire rifle and is what replaced the Gras in French frontline service. As such, the Gras is an important transitional weapon of the French military from the earlier muzzleloaders of the early 19th century through the needle-fire Chassepots and on to a centerfire metallic cartridge rifle. But after the adoption of the 86 Lebel, the Gras was phased out of French service, at least frontline French service, although it still saw use in the colonies, and it was also widely used in the developing world, probably most notably for its popularity with Greek and Armenian partisans during the Balkan Wars in the early 20th century and the First World War.
Right.
Number 2 is the Beaumont-Vitali. The original Beaumont rifle was a single-shot bolt-action rifle adopted by the Dutch Army in 1871 from a design by a Dutch gun designer named Johannes van der Beaumont. In the 1880s, the Dutch government recognized they needed to find a way to upgrade the Beaumont-Vitali, or upgrade the Beaumont design to something more modern. And towards that end, they enlisted the aid of an Italian gun designer named Arturo Vitali, who designed a magazine-fed system, a conversion system for the Beaumont rifle. This system, the Vitali system, adds a 4-round box magazine and an updated bolt to make use of the box magazine. In addition, that 4-round box magazine can be fed with 4-round stripper clips. This significantly increased the firepower and the rate of fire of the Beaumont rifles, now rechristened the Beaumont-Vitali. The Beaumont-Vitali was adopted in 1888, and it was a widely implemented conversion so that most Beaumont rifles surviving today have the Vitali conversion. The Beaumont-Vitali rifle didn't see that much use, although it did see colonial action in the Dutch East Indies, which is modern Indonesia, as well as seeing some use during the Second Boer War. But while it's not as well known as some of the other transitional rifles, the Beaumont-Vitali is fairly unique in that it's one of the best examples of a single-shot breech-loading rifle, single-shot bolt-action rifle of the late 19th century, being successfully converted into a repeating rifle without having to essentially redesign the whole gun. Really, the only things they changed in the conversion was to add this magazine and the updated bolt. Otherwise, the 71 Beaumont and the 7188 Beaumont-Vitali are very similar to each other. So, the Beaumont-Vitali. And the number 1 19th century black powder cartridge military rifle is the Mauser Gewehr 71/84. The Gewehr 71/84's history begins with the Gewehr 71, the Mauser model 1871. The Mauser 71 was the first successful breech-loading design from the Mauser brothers, Paul and Wilhelm, and it was adopted by the German military in 1872, who not long after it was developed in 1871. The 71 Mauser was a significant improvement over the earlier Gras needle gun in that it used an 11mm metallic casing or brass-cased centerfire cartridge. Even though it was a single-shot rifle, as most were at the time, this made it a far more reliable and effectively faster firing weapon than the earlier Gras, and certainly more so than earlier muzzleloaders. In the 1870s, the single-shot 1871 Mauser was an excellent weapon and was quite formidable on the battlefield. But by the late 1870s and the early 1880s, single-shot rifles had become a bit more obsolete, and the German military saw the need for a repeating rifle. So, the Mauser brothers designed what's really a complete overhaul of the 71 Mauser design to make it into a repeating rifle, making use of a tubular magazine located under the barrel, as well as a somewhat overly complex cartridge elevator system for loading cartridges from the magazine into the chamber. With a full load in the tubular magazine, plus one in the chamber and one on the elevator, you could theoretically load 10 rounds into this rifle. Most of the time you'll only use these as a single-shot rifle, loading one round at a time, and then if there was a point in the battle when it was necessary to have a higher rate of fire, you would use the lever here to engage the cartridge elevator and to thus engage the magazine. The 7184 Mauser was in service for only a few years before technological change in the late 19th century rendered it also obsolete. Specifically, the French were able to stabilize nitrocellulose smokeless powder, which resulted in the development of the French 1886 Lebel rifle. After the French adopted the 1886 Lebel, the German military needed to update to a similar smokeless powder rifle. They did not go with the Mauser design at that time, instead going with a commission-designed rifle known as the Gewehr 88 or the 1888 Commission Rifle. The Commission Rifle takes some elements of Mauser design, particularly the bolt, combines it with elements of Austrian Mannlicher design, particularly the use of a 5-round end block clip, and uses an 8mm or 7.92mm smokeless powder round similar to the 8mm Lebel. With the 88 Commission Rifle, and then the subsequent Gewehr 98 10 years later, the 71 and 7184 Mausers were obsolete. But they remained in some reserve service. Specifically, they remained in the reserves for use by Landwehr and Landsturm units really all the way through the end of the First World War. And sometimes showing up with the civil defense units at the end of the Second World War as well. The 7184 Mauser, one of the most solid, most significant of the black powder cartridge rifles of the late 19th century.